You know, there's a lot of bad stuff in the church today, but churches are not all bad. We talk about a lot of heavy stuff on the podcast, everything from church hurt to spiritual abuse to toxic systems. Yet at the same time, we all still very much so love the church. And we know that there are fantastic, healthy churches out there. So why do we talk about such tough and heavy stuff on the podcast? We talk about it because we love the local church so much, and we believe in the power of the local church and how it affects us all. So in this episode of the podcast, we want to highlight some of that good stuff. We want to highlight some of the good, healthy, and safe behaviors that are going on inside of great churches in our community and in others. And hey, for Pastors Appreciation Month, as we finish out October, we want to have an episode where we look to the good, we celebrate, and more than that, we can show you what healthy and safe churches look like when you're ready to re-engage or when you're looking for a healthy church in your own community. So if you're ready for an episode where we celebrate a little bit instead of just pointing out what needs to change in the church, then this is an episode you are going to love. Join us for episode 12 of the Church Disrupted podcast. All right, guys, so starting with Sean Reese and Leanne Reese. So, Sean, you've been on the podcast a bunch. You're one of our regular hosts in rotation. And, Leanne, you're not normally here with us, but I wanted to invite you today because you guys have, a pretty incredible story of you've been through a lot of church hurt. You've been through a lot of spiritual abuse, church trauma, way more than people know just from hearing Sean. But the reason why I wanted to have you on today is, we're actually doing this podcast episode where we're wanting to highlight churches that are good, that not every church is bad, not every pastor is bad, not every pastor is abusive. And we really want to highlight stories as well of people who have found that their faith has grown even in trauma and spiritual abuse. And for you guys, that's been so true. I've watched you go through so much at multiple churches, and yet you still serve. You still are involved, you still give, you still love Jesus, and you love his church. But y'all got some pretty cool stuff even lately as you're still, healing from some of the last hurts that you've had, yet you're engaged and you're seeing some pastors doing it right. So I wanted to invite you guys on today and just talk about some of those things you're seeing that are going so right, going so well. And to really talk about, if you guys want to share anything with listeners who are struggling to get back into church on why you keep going back to church, why you keep getting involved. I love that the dog is right now. This is Titan for everybody who's watching on the podcast. This is the first time he's joined the podcast, not in the background, but he's just right there in between
emotional
you guys. So,
support.
yes, he is our emotional support dog for this podcast. But no, I think it would be helpful because we hear from a lot of listeners. Every single week I hear from listeners who say, I'm struggling to re-engage with the church. Some aren't ready. We're not pushing you to re-engage with the church before you're ready. But what we do want you to see is we've all re-engaged with the church, and there's reasons why. So one of the things I never want this podcast to be, we're working on some projects right now that it's going to mess with some sacred cows in some churches. I'm not even going to talk about what it's going to mess with because they'll try to get in front of it. And it's going to bring some national shrapnel for us, right? Yeah. But even before we do that, I want to make sure that people know this podcast is not against the church. We're for the church. The stuff we're talking about, we want the church to look like Jesus. We want the church to protect people, to feed the sheep, to disciple people. So we never want this to only be, we're talking about the bad things. We always get more listeners. Some people are already clicking off today because they're like, oh, they're not talking about bad things. They're not sharing stories, But I think it's important that we do give honor where honor is due. We talk about toxic honor, but there is such a thing as not having honor, right? Yeah. So we want to talk about just some of the good things you're seeing in churches, and hopefully this gives you hope that when you're ready, you can re-engage with the church, and hopefully you'll learn some stuff from this that allows you to re-engage with the church at a different level. Leanne, you're going to love this. I'm actually saying this on the mic, and I haven't said this to anybody but my wife and the person who contacted me about it, but I'm about to step on to the process with my church's worship team, which is massive.
Wow.
I've asked them if you're number one, I could only do it like 12 times, like once a month. I'm a little scared to step back into any sort of level that would that would be on stage. But the same thing, like I tell you guys, it's healthy to re-engage. We found a spot that we love. We found people who are caring, people who are protective, a church that's doing incredible. So, yeah, you guys have recently stepped back into serving roles. So tell me just a little bit about your church experience, even just recently in this season in New Church.
Okay. Yeah, we've been at our new church for about a year, a little over a year now. And we fell in love with it before we even regularly started attending. God opened doors for us to be able to get to know the senior pastor before we even got on staff. I mean, on staff. God.
Yeah, we're not on staff.
That's just
we're not on staff.
Comes out, right? Gosh.
Yeah, that just comes from being on staff at churches for so long.
Right?
Yeah.
You come on. No, before we stepped into attending regularly, Sean got to sit down with him several times, and it was really healing in that sense, in that time, to be able to get to know leadership and really get a feel, because when you've done high level volunteering or you've done church staff for a long time, you know how to read the senior pastor. You know the language, whether it's fake, whether it's just a good introduction, whether it's somebody trying to pull you in,
Even if you're not sure, hey, I've got to be with this person for a little while longer. And what I love about this, like, we talk about mega churches a lot. We don't have the highest opinion of large churches for a reason. We've all worked in them. Yet even here, I think this is important to know. You guys are in a very large church, right? A very large church. This is what I would consider a mega church pastor. I believe the numbers are there.
They are.
It would make more sense for him to do the general thing pastors do, which is, why would he meet with you when you're not even going to his church? You're not a big tither. You're not involved. Yet he met with you and let you get to know him, which already said this is a different kind of pastor. This is a different kind of church.
Yes, 100%. And yeah, I mean, our church is continuing to grow by leaps and bounds, but we got to know him. We got invited to be a part of his small group. Like,
can we just stop there for a second though? Because I think this is huge. Would it be safe to say that you've spent more time with this pastor, even before you were regular attenders of his church, than you've spent with pastors that you've served under on staff?
Yes.
100%.
Absolutely.
That's what it sounds like, because I know there are places you've served where there's not a lot of access to pastors.
Now, I've been in the room with pastors on other churches a lot, but not spent time with them. It's a totally different thing. Like, I'm in the room, I'm even in meetings and stuff, I'm even talking some with them, but not like it's been different.
It's for a meeting where you have something to add. It's not just to get to know them, to spend time with them. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's very, very cool. Because again, this is a big church pastor, and he's spending that time with you. That's one of the markers I always look for in a healthy church. The pastor is always going to be spending time with the people. If it's a big church, they can't spend time with everybody, but you're going to see them spending time with people, not being stuck in a green room all the time, which 100%. Is what a lot of pastors do.
Which, to touch on that, he doesn't have a private green room like some pastors do. And I have never seen him in the green room. He's always, if he's not in the lobby,
on the right hand side,
he does.
So you guys invited us to church at one point. I couldn't handle it because it's so big. It still triggers me in ways that I can't worship while enraged and whatnot. But it seems like good church, good experience. But that's what I noticed. Him and other staff members, man, they're sitting up front. They're worshiping, even though there are multiple services.
Yep.
They're not using that as an excuse. They're worshiping every time.
Yep. Yeah, that's true.
It's true. And he, like, if he's late coming into service, it's because he's out talking to as many people as possible. Like, he wants to engage with people, which is huge. And, he doesn't have people following him around, being like, hey, it's time to go here, time to go there, or you don't have access to him.
So let's explain that, because there's going to be listeners some listeners got that, and some listeners that went right over their head, not because you haven't been in that experience. In a lot of big mega churches, you'll have pastors who are, they take what I call the parade route, right? The parade route through the lobby is, I'm going to go show my face. I'm going to talk to people so that people don't accuse me of being a green room dweller. But I've got like a 10-minute circuit. In between services, that's about it. I'm going to shake hands. I'm going to kiss babies. That's what I'm going to do. But I don't get to know anybody outside of a surface level.
Right.
And the thing that you said that was so funny, which there's reasons for this, some that are good. Yes. Sometimes these are security people, security officers, whatnot, because there have been threats. But in a lot of big churches, there's multiple people, including some pastors on the pastor team, some security people in plain clothes that follow them everywhere you go. And if you watch closely, you'll notice it. If you watch too closely, they'll identify you as a threat. So be careful, right? But the reason why they got somebody there for security in case anybody gets mad, which, again, makes sense to a certain degree. Some pastors think they're way more important than they are, right? But there's usually a pastor or two who's there to save them, is the words that was always used around me. They're there to save the pastor if he gets stuck with anyone in the lobby. So if you're wanting to talk to him more than 30 seconds, you won't just let him shake the hands and kiss the baby. There's someone who's there to come over, inject themselves. They have a whole process where they pass you off because it's, you're there to make sure that the pastor doesn't get stuck. I've not only seen this and been told about this, I've been the dude that at times was for certain people, let's make sure that they don't get stuck with the people. When what is pastoring? Pastoring is it's not being stuck with the people, it's choosing to be with people.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So when you say he not only sits in worship, he's in the lobby. Sometimes he's late to worship. Everybody can see it because he's sitting on the front row. I don't even know what that was, sitting on the front row. But he comes in late to worship, and it's because he's been really engaging with people, like long conversations where he actually knows their name, knows who they are, knows their story in this big church.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
100%.
And there's something he's instituted as a staff culture thing, which I thought was cool, is that it's not just staff culture, it's volunteer culture too, but you pray. Now, somebody says, hey, I need you to pray for me, or hey, this is going on. It's never like, okay, I'll pray for you, I'll put you on the prayer list, we'll get you. It's like, okay, we're going to stop right here in this moment. You'll see people praying in groups of people all over, and including him. Like I've walked out or come in late to worship, whatever, and I've seen him out there praying with people in the lobby before he comes in, and not just like, okay, bless you. It's actual like, hey, we're doing this.
Yeah, no, I love that. Like, you have a need, and the answer is, let's pray right now.
Yep.
Because we all know, well-meaning. I don't know how many times well-meaning over the years I've said, oh, yeah, for sure, I'll pray for you. I never think about it again.
Sure, yeah.
Because I'm busy. If I pray for you right then not only do I know I prayed for you, you know I prayed for you, but I'm more likely to remember it because we had a human connection.
Yeah.
So I think that's massive too. But those are all just kind of surface things. Those are things you could see. And I don't think your pastor's doing this at all because it's exhausting. That's why most of them don't do that. But those things could all be done manipulatively if they wanted to be, okay? Yes. It's hard to keep up that facade for forever, but you've seen a lot more than that that's let you know, hey, you really believe this is the real deal. I don't know your pastor. I want to get to know him better simply because I'm wanting to highlight more pastors and push people to be able to point people toward very healthy churches, large and small, and in our area and across Tennessee. For those that are listening outside of Tennessee, we're coming for you. We're working on a national network. It's going to take a few years to build it, but yeah. So every time you talk about this guy, it seems like somebody I want to get to know. Tell me more of what you've seen. That just this Pastor Appreciation Month that you say, I'm so glad we have this pastor in this church right now.
We've, in the short time that we've been there, we've been able to see him and his staff practice what they preach. He will get up there and be so vulnerable and transparent to the point that you're like, oh, senior pastors probably shouldn't be that vulnerable, but it's so good, like this past Sunday brought me to absolute tears, and I was like, thanks for that. But we've been walking through a series, and he was talking about, still being in love with the church, how he's still in love with the church, how we should still be in love with the church. And I knew where he was going after years of being in church. I knew where he was going with this. So I was like, oh.
The real question was, how was he going to handle it when he got there?
Yes. And he addressed it head on. Hey, there's church hurt. There's church hurt everywhere. We all experience it. And he said, even my hands, my words could have brought church hurt to people in this room or people that have left. And he stood up there and said, if I've done anything through actions, through words, through, the moving of my hands in places, in ministries and stuff like that, I'm sorry, because that was never my heart. And if you can't find that safety here, let us help you find safety wherever is best for you.
Hey, Church Disrupted community, if you've experienced religious trauma, church hurt, or spiritual abuse, and you want to heal and let go of your triggers and hurt, then we want to help. The Forgiveness Link and the East Tennessee Mentorship Association are two partners of the podcast that exist to help you leave your trauma behind and start living your best life. Church hurt and spiritual abuse don't have to hold you back anymore. Rob and the Forgiveness Link team will help you leave your trauma behind and experience massive healing in as little as 8 weeks. Their intensive process, it's faith-based, practical, and extremely powerful. I've experienced firsthand the transformative power of the Forgiveness Link process, and I would love to see you experience it as well. Dustin Stitt and the East Tennessee Mentorship team, they'll help you find healing from a different approach. This veteran-owned business is faith-informed and will walk through the healing journey at your own pace with you. From groups to individual sessions, they'll help you continue to take consistent steps forward toward the person that you want to be and the life that you want to live. Both partners can help you transform your life, and we believe in both of them. One is more clinical and delivers fast-paced results, and the other is more relational and works at the pace that you commit to. But please, 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 please don't stay hurting on your own. Your church hurt experiences, they don't have to define you, and they don't have to hold you back any longer. If you're ready to step into healing and leave your trauma behind, please reach out to one of our partners. You can find out more information about them in the description below or at disruptedchurch.church on the Partners tab. You can meet with either of our partners at no cost just to hear how they'll work with you. And also they'll let you know about special rates they have just for Church Disrupted community members. But regardless of which of these two partners you choose to work with, you'll be in good hands. And I can't wait to hear how your life has changed for the good, for the better, because you work with them. Yeah. Let's talk about a nuance there that's so important. He didn't say, I'm so sorry that you felt hurt by us.
Right.
I'm so sorry that you felt hurt by me, because that's a gaslighting apology. We talked about it on the podcast before. That takes all the responsibility away. He said, I'm sorry if I've done that. And the only reason why he's saying if is because I don't know who I've done this to, but I'm saying this from the stage because I'm assuming I've done this.
Yeah.
Right. The assumption is we've hurt you. The mark of a healthy pastor isn't a pastor who's never church hurt anyone, a pastor who's never spiritually abused anyone. It's the mark of a healthy church is the same thing. It's not a church that doesn't have any church hurt or any spiritual abuse. It's when they own it and do their best to limit it, do their best to apologize and fix it when it happens, because all those things are easy to happen on the surface.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, this isn't the first pastor that I've heard do this. But it's very few. I can count them on one hand, the pastors across the country that I've heard actually apologize for church hurt instead of vilifying it, because that's what most pastors do. They vilify it, these people who just are walking in a spirit of offense, right? But beyond that, he fully apologized. No if apologies, no gaslighting apologies. It was hey, I'm sorry if you're someone that I've done this to. Did he offer an apology if they would come to him?
Yeah.
Yeah. He said, reach out to him.
Yeah.
If he's ever done anything, he said, feel free to reach out to me. I would sit down with you. I'm
Wow.
So he put it out there. He put the call out there, and not only did he apologize, for stuff he's done. He said, hey, if you're at this church coming from a place of church hurt, he said, I'm sorry on behalf of the church, because that's not Jesus.
Yeah.
That's people doing those things to you, and so we're glad you're here and you can find a place of safety here.
Well, he even said, if you haven't gotten that closure from people, which, all of us sitting at this table,
Most of the people listening.
and most of the people listening have not gotten that closure from the people that they've been hurt by, because we do know it's people. It's not Jesus. It's not God. It's people, which we're all fallible because we've all hurt somebody.
Let's talk about this as well, too. Because we talk about the church as the people of God all the time, right? But the church is the organization. The church is the building. The church is growth track. The church is serving. a lot of churches talk about themselves and the organization of the church all the time until church hurt comes up. And when church hurt comes up, well, that wasn't Jesus, that was the people.
Yeah.
Why'd you leave? It was the people, right? When it's both things, right? We got to have the care of the people if we're going to have the love of the people at the same time. But one of the things I really love about what's happening with this pastor, though, is it's hard to apologize. It's hard to not vilify church hurt because it's so much easier to do that, right? And you're going to get amens for it.
Yeah.
Because people who haven't experienced it are going to amen that, because especially like, where we live, there's such a conservative bent to everything that if you start talking about a victim's mindset, everybody's going to rally against that. And I get it because I've been there, because I have that same conservative mindset, right? So you're going to get amens, you're going to get everything else. He didn't go for the cheap amens.
No.
Right? He apologized. He did all that. One of the hardest things he did, though, and this was a ballsy move. Okay. I don't normally say that, talk about pastors, but it was straight up ballsy move. When he said, if I've hurt you, come to me.
Yeah.
I want to hear, I want to listen, I want to apologize.
Yep.
Right. A lot of people aren't going to feel comfortable doing that. They may not feel safe doing that, but opening yourself up to that as a pastor, that is scary. Because a lot of it may have happened on accident. That's a great way to feel like you've been, just beat up. So I love the fact that he's done that. One of the other things that you guys said, though, that I wanted to highlight that I think is really cool is, saying, and this is scary for pastors. This is giving season, man. This is stewardship season. Those are the nice words, but this is a season where everybody's asking for your money and your support and everything else. And he's sitting there saying, hey, if you don't feel safe here, can't feel safe here, we'll help you find another place. Yeah. We want you to be in the church, though. So when other people are saying, hey, please stay, please come, please get butts in seats, please invite your friends, please give us all your money, he's saying if you need to leave, leave. Yeah. Because we want you to be able to be engaged in the church. So just a lot of really cool stuff there. I'm glad that y'all are able to hear all this in one sermon. Yeah. But I think the bigger deal is, would you say, does it feel like it's lined up with everything you've seen out of the last year with this person?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
100%. And I think with the vulnerability that he always brings, and the conviction that you can see that he preaches with, like his sermons aren't just, oh, I heard about this story about this person. It makes me think about this. Instead, it's hey, this has hit me too. Either I struggle with this, or I have fought, this battle with this situation, and I want to help people because I love them so much, and I don't want them to go through the pain that I've gone through, or the struggles or the doubt that I've gone through. And so when he stood up there and delivered that, like, just the heart that you could feel behind it, it's been a while since one of our biggest church hurts, but it's still there. Like, we've moved past it, but it's still there because we never had full closure.
Well, and like, I'll get text messages from you guys. Now I'll get less text messages, and you'll say something in the community, because this is something that, our community's small, but it's one of the things that sometimes we'll be quiet for days and no one's talking. Then someone will be like, hey, I tried to go back to church today, or hey, this thing was said at church today and it sent me into a tailspin, right? But we've had a lot of those conversations. Hey, I'm trying to step back into serving, and this person said this thing or sent this email or sent this text, and now I'm in a tailspin, right? So if you feel those things, man, those triggers are normal. That happens. I have to walk out of church every so often. And, I've got some people who have emailed us and they're like, hey, Jeff, are you sure that you're healed? Well, when you are healed and healing, you're okay to talk about trauma. When you're not, you hide it. So the fact that we're talking about it, yes, we are all healing. But once you go through church hurt and spiritual abuse, very few people are fully healed on this side of heaven. There are always triggers. They're going to get you. So you guys have overcome those, though, to stay at this church because you've seen so much good. There have been people at the church outside of the senior pastor who have noticed when you're feeling some of those things and come alongside to make sure that you feel safe as well, correct?
Yes.
Oh, there's been so many great people. It's, whether it's been other staff members or it's been volunteers. We have a really good friend, who goes there, and he's always checking up on us, and Sean especially. We've been friends since we moved to Tennessee, pretty much. And I met one of the volunteers just offhandedly. I really don't remember how I met her, but I got connected with her. Oh, it was at a conference. I got connected with her, and she had been through a lot of the same things as a pastor. And we don't get a lot of chance to connect, but when we do, the love that I know that she has for me, because we have that same connection, she gets it. Yeah. She understands. She can tell, when I'm going through something. When we walked through this last biggest season with you guys, she reached out to check on me. She checked on you guys as well and wanted to know if there was anything they could do or pray about.
Which is huge because we don't know them. They only
No.
know us through you guys.
Yes. But she also said, how are you doing? Because I know this brings a lot of feelings. So just the whole culture, we've always said, if it's really flowing properly out of leadership from the top, and it's so passionate and it's so beautiful, it continues to just flow. Now that can go on the bad side too. But in this situation, we're seeing that good that's overflowing from the senior pastor that the staff has latched onto, that the high level volunteers have latched onto, and then it just keeps going and flowing down.
Well, one of the just weird things about y'all's church, because I've watched it before y'all were there, right? And so Sean, and you know this, and if you're in the church world, you hear a whole lot of things, insider information about churches in your area.
Yes.
Okay, especially if they're big, especially if they're somewhat successful, right? Like there's no hiding it. Like there's, especially if you're in the worlds that I'm in as well with consulting and stuff.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of churches that I just won't walk into, and I'm not saying they're even bad churches. There's enough dysfunction I know about before I ever step foot in your parking lot. I'm not walking in there. Y'all go to a church that because of its size and because of its affiliations and all of that, my assumption was I've never seen a church that has all of these markers that doesn't have crazy crap going on. I'm not going there, right? I'm not going there. But I've talked to so many people. I'm talking hundreds of people now who have left other churches because of severe spiritual abuse, church hurt, struggle. I've seen some people who just left these churches because they saw this. It never happened to them, but they saw through the veil. They figured it out, right? Yet hundreds of people that have had these experiences have went to this church, and some after 3 and 4 years of going to this church still go, it's the real deal.
Yeah.
It's the real deal. I've never seen a church this size where this many people years later are going, it's the real deal. It's the real deal. It's not perfect. Here's why. But there's no big abuse issues or anything like that. Now, with any church, it can be the real deal and it can become abusive. It can become, toxic overnight. So we all have to decide who we're going to be every day we wake up. Right? Like I can wake up and decide to be a jerk tomorrow, right? I can wake up and decide to be a manipulator tomorrow, but every day I have to choose that. So we're not putting a blanket, kind of seal on any church that just says, oh, they're forever safe.
Right.
But over time, they fought for this, like really, really fought for this. And this is crazy. I don't know if I've shared any of this on the podcast before, but I may have. So if I'm repeating myself, sorry, guys. But we went to a worship night with you guys at this church not too long ago, and y'all are great because anytime it's a big crowd for a variety of reasons, some of them are triggers, some of them are because of what we're doing and how known I am, in this area, especially in church world. I like to walk in late with seats saved and walk out early from big church events.
Yep.
Because I don't want to get stuck. And so y'all had us some seats saved. We were walking in straight to where we were going and going to walk out because, we wanted to be able to worship this worship night, but we didn't want to get caught in all the other stuff. And even though it was about to start, one of the people who was going to be singing that night made a beeline for us. Stranger, stops us, taps me on the shoulder, says, "You're Jeff Cochran," right? And my eyes are like, oh my gosh. And then they're like, okay, let me ask that again. Are you Jeff Cochran, right? Yeah. And I'm like, yes. And I love your podcast. I've been listening so much. Let me tell you about the church hurt I've experienced. Let me tell you she just told me the church she came from. And I'm like, okay, I get it. And man, the countdown's about to stop. She's supposed to be going and doing something. And she's like, I just want you to know I'm praying for you and I love you and I'm grateful for you. And one of the reasons why we walk in late to big churches like that is that's not normally the response we get.
Yeah.
There's people who are mad. Like they're pissed off about what we're doing. And this is someone who was not worried about what they were supposed to do that night, not worried about anything else. They just needed to come and say, hey, thank you for being an honest voice. We love you. We're praying for you. And that meant a lot to me. Spoke volumes from your church. Also, it speaks volumes that I try to get in and get out every time and I can't. Like there are always people who engage in life with us. And then I'm like, oh, that wasn't that bad. But, I'm just not sure if I can trust it. So, and that was just a volunteer, not a staff member, not anybody. So that's one of the things that sticks out to me is it just feels like there's so many people beyond you guys, then y'all have gotten really close. It sounds like from what you were saying, though, Leanne, that your pastor tells a lot of stories and he's vulnerable, but usually pastors are either one, they're the hero of every story, or, and it's really just the other side of the coin, when they are vulnerable and they say something, they end it in such a way that they're still the hero of the story. They never leave anything that makes them look bad with that. It's a calculation. It'll make me look better. It sounds to me like through what you're saying that this guy doesn't do this, that he is really real. He's really open. We've all been at churches that say they're raw, they're real, they're open, they're honest, and they're not, right? But it sounds like this guy is. Like, how often is he telling stories from stage where he's not the hero of the story?
Like every week.
Yeah.
Every week. It's just him being like, hey, I am literally the same as you sitting there listening to my words. Like, I am a person just like you, and it makes it so relatable. And actually, we get to see him in other places where you get what you see. He's the same personable, loving person off and on the stage. Our kids go to school together. And so we see them quite frequently.
So your kids go to school together and you're seeing them in real life. You can't fake that.
No. And I love it because, his wife is the same. His wife is just absolutely amazing as well. And same thing, like I see her and it's always she like isn't like the flyby like, oh, hi, like she'll stop and say, hey, how are you? Like she means it. She did that this past Sunday too. And it's been a hard couple weeks. And so I was just like, it's good. Like I stumbled for words because I knew,
fine.
Yes,
I'm fine.
I knew if I told her, hey, well, this is what's going on and it's really hard, she would stop and listen. But I also, knew, hey, we're in the middle of the lobby and she is literally about to go do worship. Like I'm not going to do that to her.
Yeah.
But, I wanted to be respectful of her time. But I knew in that moment, if I said, hey, I really needed you, she would stop and say, hey, let's talk.
I think that's what's crazy. Like, from what you guys have told me and from what other people have told me, it seems like everybody, including that pastor, that if they were really needed, may not show up on stage.
No, that's absolutely true.
100%.
Even for the message.
I don't know if that's I haven't seen that with the pastor, but it's happened. I've seen it happen to some people on the worship team. I've seen it happen to volunteers in certain areas. I've seen it happen.
So, you and I served on staff at a church together for a while. And, when you're in big churches, a lot of times when someone's late to stage, it doesn't happen often because people get real mad, like big mad, big mad.
Big man.
People get big mad when you miss it because usually it's, I was hanging in the green room talking to my buddies, making jokes, eating snacks, and had no idea what time it was, and I didn't show up.
Yeah.
Right. I only missed stage, I think, twice the entire time that I was at the last mega church I was at. Both times it's because I was doing ministry to people. Never because I was in a green room, and stuff like that. It sounds like that's what these people are doing. That they don't. One, the pastor doesn't have a green room because usually you've got a worship green room in big churches, and then you got a pastoral green room, and that's where they're very separate. Like very few people get to pierce the holy veil of the pastor's green room, right?
Oh yeah.
But it sounds like not only did they not have that, but people are willing to not show up, and that the thought process is we're not big mad if someone doesn't show up on stage because we're assuming they're doing ministry. Something happened. We're assuming the best instead of where the heck were you, what's going on, which I think is fantastic. So what have you guys seen? Like those are just some general things and stuff, but what have you seen that you would encourage pastors with? Because part of this for Pastors Appreciation Month is I talk to a lot of pastors who want to do this right. They empathize with what we're going through. They empathize with what's happening. And I'll say this, I think it's important. Like our original thought for this episode, I wanted to have a round table of pastors I believe in and simply ask them questions about how they're leading because I think they're doing it so well. But I walked through a fairly large number of pastors who were just scared, uncomfortable, both because of how other churches come against this stuff. They didn't want to be, labeled as the church hurt spiritual abuse people. They didn't want other churches coming after them. There's a lot of different reasons for that. But I have these people asking me in the background a lot, which is, again, why we're doing this episode this way is because we could not get the pastors to do it in a way that was comfortable, in a way that was safe for them, which is sad that you've got like other church bullies and church mafia coming after people, right?
Yeah.
But I have a lot of really good pastors who ask me all the time, hey, what do you think about this? What about this? What are things I can do? And we're working on training for pastors to help them with that, right? But from y'all's vantage point, not from like a training vantage point, but just from what you've seen, you felt, you've experienced, what are some things that pastors can do to protect their flock from church hurt and spiritual abuse? And then also, what are some things they can do to help them heal? Because that's two separate things. You have to feel safe before you'll ever trust someone enough to let them, help you heal. You have to feel safe and have a connection with a therapist before you're going to let them actually dive deep, right? It's the same thing with a pastor at church. So those two things, what are things that you've seen that you'd recommend for pastors? Hey, this is what we've seen and we wish you would do to protect people. Also, some things that you've seen that would help them to help people heal.
Go ahead. Transparency and authenticity are huge.
And in what ways? Because those could
they could mean a lot of things, but like transparency, meaning like what our pastor did, say, hey, I know I've done this and I'm sorry, that openness, it can mean a lot to people. The authenticity, it being, who they are on stage is who they are in person. And if you're not a people person, then you might not be a pastor. You might be a teacher or a preacher.
Be a great preacher.
I've heard it said, I had a pastor one time. He was a great preacher. And in fact, somebody else said this to me, like, he's a great preacher. He's a terrible pastor because he's just not a people person. He doesn't want to, but he can preach the roof off.
It's okay. You can say who it was because he's never going to listen to it. It was my dad. My dad said that
about the pastor, a pastor.
One of our pastors.
Yeah. Great. But he was a great guy. We liked him and, we went to dinner with him and stuff like that,
Still love him.
Still do. But he just, there's a difference between even being friends with certain people and being a pastor, because I've seen pastors who have their clique, their group, even just like normal attenders. They just have their group of people that they hang out with, that they go to dinner with, that come to their house. Most of the time it's leadership people like elder teams or something like that. But sometimes they have people just who come and, maybe they're big tithers or something, but they're not great at everybody else.
Yeah.
Or it's only surface level, like
not
you
great
said.
At soul care, great at,
right.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, shaking hands, kissing babies.
Well, and I think that's the good side of it. Something I've heard a lot, though. I've heard this specifically said to me. I've also heard that multiple people have had, very similar things said. But I've been told multiple times by people in these circles, by some of the big name pastors, and I'm not going to name any of them, but the ones that everybody would know if I dropped their name. And I used to, man, I love so many of these people. I had so many heroes in the faith like this, and I just had someone tell me, hey, you won't like them if you meet them. If you meet them in a green room, you won't like them anymore. Right? Mm-hmm. Because when you see the way they act, you hear the way they talk in a green room, it's totally different because they struggle with people. Yeah. Doesn't necessarily mean they're a bad person. Some of the stuff I've heard, probably are, right? But it's very different when you're able to pastor people. Yeah. And that's something that I hear about a lot of them. So the question is your pastor the same person when you would meet them in a green room? And probably a bigger question, are they the kind of pastor that's going to be in a green room or not? Like I'm going to preach this weekend at a friend's church. They might have a green room. I don't know, right? This isn't going to come out before they hear this, so it's going to be fine. But if they have a green room, like I'm not going in it. Like the only time I use a green room is if I need to pray before a message. But I'm already prepped for this message. I don't need to do anything. I want to be with the people. I want to meet people. So one, is your pastor in a green room, and two, are they the same person if they're in a green room? Because there are uses for that. We'll talk about that at some point. But.
Well, also, are they the same person when your worship team can hear them through their inner ears when nobody else can? Because that's happened to me before.
Doesn't get hit right.
Yeah. Yes. I've heard that, and you're like, oh.
Yeah. Are they the same person that the church sees on Sunday morning when they're in an all-staff meeting and someone secretly records it? Because here's the thing. People wouldn't need to secretly record meetings if you're the same person, right? Mm-hmm. Beyond just being the same person, though, in the school line, in the lobby, right? What are some other ways that like churches and pastors could be transparent, though? Because transparency and authenticity go so many other ways. Like that gets into the cogs of the wheels of how the church runs.
Well, like she said earlier, you've got pastors who, pastors shouldn't be that vulnerable. And honestly, They probably should. I mean, I'm not saying pastors should go up on stage and list every sin that they committed that week, because that wouldn't be good, because nobody else should do that either.
Yeah.
When the Bible talks about confessing your sins one to another, it's it's not, you stand up before the church and tell everybody. I've seen churches that do that, like they make
that's
people
abuse.
stand up. Yes, but being transparent is, hey, I messed up on this, or hey, we took up this big offering. We said we were going to build this building, or we're going to do this thing. It's not working out, and we don't know what to do with it. Hey, maybe if you gave to this and you want your money back, come get it, or something like that.
And I don't know if he's done that, but literally I heard this. This is a story that you haven't heard. It's someone that you don't know. I have a friend who goes to another big church in town, and he's like, hey, we gave to this thing, and some people got upset because we were giving to this big campaign.
Mm-hmm.
And people got upset because they felt like some of the things that were done wasn't exactly what was said. They felt misled.
Yeah.
They felt manipulated. And the pastor and the elder team got up and said, we are so sorry. Here's where we made mistakes. We didn't mean to mislead anybody, but this wasn't clear. Mm-hmm. We are so very sorry. Here's what it's going to. Here's why some of these things turned out different. There's some stuff that we didn't anticipate the change. Yep. I'm so sorry. And then they stopped, right? Mm-hmm. People were still upset, though. People were still upset because it was a good start, but it didn't feel like enough. They got up the next week and said, you know what? We made another mistake. We thought that if we just told you guys what happened, it would be fine. We need to make ourselves available. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to pause what we're doing for I think it was 6 weeks or whatever. And you can come talk to us. We're going to be here every service. You can talk to an elder. You can talk to a pastor. We'll open up the books. We're going to show you exactly what's going on, and we're not going to take up any more money until we've done that, right? Mm-hmm. That's a real story where they had to come back multiple times and say, hey, we screwed up here, but we're going to fight for transparency because, man, we're asking for your money, and if you don't feel comfortable with what you gave, we will find a way to give it back.
Yeah, that's the transparency part. It's owning up to your mistakes that you make that affect people. I mean, sometimes transparency isn't on a large scale. Sometimes transparency is going to the person and be like, hey, either somebody said that you were hurt by this that I did, or like, hey, I realized that before anybody even says they're mad, I realized that I did something that might have upset you, or if it did, let me know. Did it upset you? Yeah. Well, I just realized I did that, and I'm sorry. Just that's transparency, saying that I'm owning up to the mistakes, not just corporately on big level.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of pastors who will look at, well, that's just one person, so what if they leave? They weren't even big tithers anyways. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't. You've heard it. I've heard that said. They weren't big tithers anyways, so it doesn't matter. And that's not authenticity or transparency.
No. Well, it's also not biblical because you're treating people different based on what they give.
Yep.
There are certain people that when they leave, they're getting a call from the senior pastor. Yes. They're getting a text. They're, hey, can I take you out to dinner? Can I try to talk you out of this?
Well, there are certain people who left who are getting calls years later about, hey, I know that you left a while ago. Maybe it's time for you to come back.
Yeah, but that's just code for we really miss your money.
Well, exactly.
And your 100%. Volunteer hours.
Most of the time, and most of the big tithers, they can see that coming from a mile away anyways.
Yeah.
But, that's...
But it takes a lot for a whole group of people to say we got this wrong multiple times, right? So I think all of that is when you said that, I just thought, oh, this is a real story. Yeah. I haven't heard. That's like the only time I've ever heard that happening. Mm-hmm. But guys, this does happen. There are good, healthy, life-giving churches that are honest and authentic and transparent, and they care about people. They don't just care about what you can do for their church. They don't just care about the money that you give. They care about you. It's worth finding them, right? Yes. What are some of those other things, though, that they can do to protect people or help people heal?
I think just really, whether it be the pastor of that ministry or the senior pastor, just really diving into who their volunteers are when they first come on. Honestly, we got a call from our kids pastor pretty early on, and he was like, hey, they were opening their first satellite campus, essentially, I guess what you would call it.
Second campus.
Franchise.
And so they were like, hey, we'd love to sit down and talk with you guys because we know y'all have done this at a different level. And we also knew they're going to ask us to serve 100%, right? So we went and we
This
had
whole like lunch, dinner, coffee,
Yes,
whatever is to
we
ask us to
know.
go to this
We
campus and
know.
serve.
Like,
That's
we
the
weren't-
expectation.
we weren't mad, but we were like, we know.
We know
You know, we've been there.
we know the playbook.
So we went and ended up being like 3 hours, 3 or 4 hours. And they were like, we just want to hear everything because we know y'all have been through some stuff. So we were like, okay.
All right, buckle up, let's go.
So 3 hours later, they were like, they were totally honest and transparent and like, oh my gosh, we can't believe you're in church. Also, we're going to let y'all rest. We're not going to ask
Maybe
you to.
maybe don't.
We're not going to
serve.
ask you to
if you ever
serve.
want to, but
But they were also like, but if we have any questions as we go forward with this new campus, would y'all be willing to like sit down and talk or anything like that? We were like 100%. But it was respecting the fact that they knew, okay, we know that they've been through a lot. They're still just trying to be in church. We don't need to pressure them
Yeah.
that serving is going to heal all their wounds.
But they legitimately, it wasn't just how they started. They legitimately wanted to hear your story and pushed for it when you said, I don't think you do.
yeah, because we said that we told them like, hey, it's a long story, and I don't. You probably don't want to hear it all. And throughout the whole thing, it wasn't just like, okay, can we go? What's good job? It was. Tell me more about that. You know how that worked. So it was like actually they made it 3 hours long.
Mm-hmm.
Versus,
And then didn't ask you to serve. The only thing they said about serving is we're going to ask you not to serve right now because we want to help you heal.
Yeah.
So I've got a pastor friend who, you know, for a few different reasons right now, it's just not right for our family to go to their church. But I would love to go to their church because you know he's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
But we met through this process. We literally met. I met this pastor because he's a stranger I didn't know who on Facebook said, I see what you're going through. And I want you to know I love you and I'm praying for you. Then asked one day if we could have coffee. And when we had coffee, it wasn't, I thought he was going to try to like, okay, he's trying to get me to his church, right? He wasn't. He's wanted to hear my story. He asked the same thing. And I remember saying, hey, I don't think you want that long story. Like, yes, I do. It was like 2.5 hours later because you can't tell it short. You can't, right? And he did the same thing. It was tell me more about that. It was tell me more about that. And this is a person we don't always agree. You know, sometimes he's gonna text me about things on the podcast. He's like, I don't like that one. I don't think you had the right take on that one. You know, which again, by the way, pastors, like I invite any pastor who ever wants to sit on the podcast. Like if you think we got bad takes, like I'd love to have some pastoral presence on the podcast outside of us, people who are in the trenches, because it's not about agreement. It's about having the conversations, right?
Right.
But no, he's fantastic. And he did the same thing. Like, you know, the pastor at the church that we go to now, him and his wife invite us over to their house just to ask us and talk to us about these things. And so I think that's powerful. If you get to know people before you ask of them. If you said when your volunteers first come on, I would say if you don't know people well enough to talk about their story and no one else in that ministry does, you don't know them well enough to ask them to volunteer yet.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, 100%. And that's what we've gotten all the way around. Like, you know, just because of, again, we've been to several churches, so we already had friends at this church before we even started. So even them knowing what we can do or finding out more about, you know, what we can do and what we've done in the church, it's always been that unnerving, like, oh my gosh, when are they going to start like banging down our door? Like, you're not serving yet and all this stuff. And it hasn't been that pressure from anybody, you know, that we've met with or talked to as far as staff or like, you know, team leads of different teams. It's always been a like, hey, like we're just here whenever you're ready. Like you call that shot, you know, when you're ready to start. So you do that. I mean, you know, even when Sean, right before he started serving, one of the team leads, she came to me, we're pretty close. And she said, look, I know he doesn't want to jump in. He doesn't want to be like leadership. He doesn't want to do any of that. So I'll respect that. And even if he just wants to do like once a month or anything, she's like, I see his value. And when he's ready, I want to use him, but I won't use him past his boundary.
Yeah. Well, and that was, you know, talking to the worship pastor at the church I go to now. And I literally went up and I said, I don't have to be on stage. I can be like in the booth. Like, where do you need me? And is it okay if I only serve once a month? I cannot jump back into immediately serving every week and being on a stage. That's not going to be healthy, you know, for me. Also, we're super busy. I'm wanting to continue to, you know, get in the church, and he knows what we're going through. Because, you know, we were going through, he's like, man, you can serve whenever you want, not when you want. If we start you and it's too much, we'll back off. If it's not enough, that's fine. And then it's actually been, for some people this might frustrate them, but it didn't me. It's been like 3 weeks since we talked, and then I got a message from him, this morning that's like, oh, hey, I forgot to send you this thing, because he hasn't been badgering me about when are you going to send in your audition, when are you going to do all this stuff, when are you going to watch this video, fill out this form, whatever. Instead, it's just like, hey, I forgot to send you this. I'm so sorry. Whenever you're ready, we'll get you connected, but we're in no hurry, right? And I think there's just something so special to that, because at a lot of churches, especially the bigger they are, but this isn't just a big church problem, churches are so desperate for volunteers because it takes so many volunteers to make it run that you can feel the pressure the moment that you get involved. You feel the expectation, right? You feel like you're letting them down when you say no. And it's not just with volunteering, but it's with money and everything else. It sounds like they've never approached you guys about, hey, we expect you to give when you're not ready. We expect you to give a certain amount. We expect you to serve. We expect you to serve a certain amount, right? Like, and in this season, you're getting a lot of, hey, if you're not serving, you're disobedient. And if you're not giving, you don't trust God. And if you're not giving, and now we're getting to the point to where 10% is just where you start. Yeah. And that's what you got to do to be obedient. But pastors are telling the stories about how they raise, how people in their church or them raise their percentage every year. And, like, the Bible does not call us to tithe 32%. Okay, it's just
33%. That's a little different.
You might be abusing your family if you're tithing 32%. Maybe not, because maybe you're set up to where you can, right? But none of those expectations have been put on you guys here.
Oh no, and it's been, any attention that we've gotten has been just pure, like, hey, we see you. You're important. You matter. Your story matters. Your healing process matters. I mean, even with our oldest daughter, she would take the younger ones to kids' church all the time, and the kids' pastor saw her and he said, from the moment, like, I saw her, like, start dropping them off, there was this thing, he said, that I knew that I needed to, be intentional with her. Like, hey, they both like would wear anime shirts.
That's so cool.
And so he would be like, hey, I really like your shirt. Do you like this or that? And he said, hey, if you ever want to serve, I'm here. But didn't say, hey, come to Next Steps and make sure you go through all 3 weeks and then we'll have you serving, in 3 weeks. It was hey, like, if you ever want to join, we're here. And just was intentional whenever he saw her, like, I see you, hey, how are you doing? All of that. And now one of his other high level volunteers is like, she's the best junior leader that we have in kids' church. She connects with the kids. She loves to serve. Anything we ask her to do, she does. And it's all because the kids pastor planted this seed of, hey, I love you whether you come and serve or not.
Planted a seed of no expectation. It's like, I know they're your kid. I know they've been through some of this. I see them every week. Let's talk. I love it. Our kids go to a different youth group than the church that we go to, right? So I had one of the youth pastors sit down with me at one point just to not talk about anything. They're not asking us to give. They're not asking us to serve. They're not asking us to attend their church, not do any of that. But just one, wanted to know about me, but two, said, hey, here's a couple of things I've seen, in one of your kids. And it wasn't like they're in trouble or anything else. It was here's the things I've seen that I'm praying for. And I'll never forget it. Just said, hey, I think some of this stuff y'all went through is latching onto them in this way, and I just want to know how I can pray for them, how I can serve you guys, and was very helpful. Helped me to have some wisdom with my kiddo to do some things to put up some boundaries to protect them as much as I could, because the shrapnel of church hurt and spiritual abuse gets on our kids in a way that it's impossible for someone to know unless they've, one, had kids in it, and two, I think it's impossible to know until the kids tell us. So one of the things we're wanting to do with the nonprofit when we started is actually do research into kids of those that have been church hurt, spiritual abused, especially kids of church staff that have went through that, how it's affected them, how it's affected their faith, and how we can serve them better when they go through that. Because especially if you're a pastor and you have to fire someone, we got to do a better job when that happens of figuring out how do we love this family, because it's not like, the boss you don't know. Your dad's boss, your mom's boss fires them, and it's like, oh, I don't really know about them. That happens with jobs versus when it was your pastor, who baptized you or this, that, or the other. So for you guys, just as we kind of, as we get ready to land the plane, in this part, because I want to honor y'all's time, and we said this would be shorter, and it's like 50 minutes already. So But if you just had to give a couple of things, like 2 or 3 things, what would be your recommendations to pastors who say, I want to protect people in my flock and I want to help those who have been hurt heal? If you could only give them 2 or 3 things, what would be your recommendations?
Listen, truly listen. Don't listen with a response in mind or how you're going to defend yourself or the church or whatever. God doesn't need you to defend him.
Mm-hmm.
You can do it. So
Or
listen,
the other church.
or the other church. Yeah.
Mm.
Listen and be available. To even if you're a mega church pastor, I know that pastors of churches of 10,000. I know we have a whole different podcast on how you do that, but they can't meet with everybody. It's not possible. But at least have structure in place. If you are going to be that big, it needs to be something that can handle it. But I think listening, being available, and being open.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things I've heard from almost everyone who has been through significant religious trauma that step back into the church is no matter how big or small, there was a pastor that was available to them, that listened, didn't judge, and cared.
Yep.
So no matter how big your church is, just know when a pastor can't be available to you. I've seen very few people step back into that because once people are hurt, they don't want to go to the best show. Even if that's very important to them. Worship's very important to them. Excellence is very important to them. They want to go where they can be known and cared for and where they can trust. So if I can't be knee to knee and eye to eye with that pastor, it's going to be harder. So again, if you're a senior pastor of a large church, you can't do that. Have some sort of system where some pastors who represent you well can.
Yeah.
Leanne, what about you? What would you say to the pastor who just wants to be better?
I think be vulnerable enough and transparent enough on and off stage. We talked about it a little bit. Be the person that they're going to see at school events. Let that be the same person they see on stage on Sundays. Because that's
even if it's ugly.
Huge. Yes. Because then you know what you're getting. No part of this is fake. Just be the same person. Be who you are on and off stage. And be personable. Like he said earlier, if you're not going to be personable with people, you're probably in the wrong position.
Yeah.
You need to find a different one. And I think being open to listen and hearing without expectation is huge. Yeah. Our everybody on staff at the church, our church says we're a church of second chances. And it's true because there's not one person, one pastor that we've heard give a message, tell their story that isn't a second chance that most other churches would be like, yeah, you're not allowed to be a pastor. You've been disqualified.
Yeah.
And so the beauty in that was seeing, no, this really is a place where you feel like you've been discarded and you've been told you're worthless, but you can come, and they've created that safe space, not only telling people, but showing them, hey, this is who we are. So be open without expectations.
Yeah. So let's finish this way, because I would love to do this. And, I think people need to hear it, and they need to hear how real it is. But this isn't just for, this is really for two people. It's for the people who have been hurt. You've been through spiritual abuse, religious trauma, and you want to get back in the church, but every time you show up in the parking lot, you get sick and you can't. And I want you to know, if that's you, that's okay. Just keep taking a step. Yeah. It's no wrong step if you can't go all the way in. It's no wrong step if you can't stay all the way through the service. Just keep taking a step. Yeah. But this is also for pastors. Pastors who are tired, pastors who are hurting, because spiritual abuse, and we'll talk about this in another episode, but it goes both ways. Congregants, parishioners, they can spiritually abuse pastors. We talked about it a little before. We'll talk about it more, but I would love to end with, and I don't know if your pastor listens to this. I'm guessing he doesn't. But if he were listening, just what would you want to say as a thank you on Pastor Appreciation Month?
Thank you for listening to our story and apologizing from the heart for people that you don't have to apologize for, and for not seeing our past on us every time you see us, but seeing what God still has for us and being intentional with us. intentional with love, with connection, with vulnerability, with transparency. Thank you for creating a safe space that you always want to make safer and better for the kingdom, and not for the name on the front of the church or the name of the senior pastor, but just because you want so many people to feel as safe as the stories you hear.
That's awesome.
Kind of the same thing. Thank you for getting to know me beyond my experience and all that. For being open, for being in the same networks and groups as the people who really did this, some really crazy stuff to us, and not taking sides, not being like, well, yeah, that person's a terrible person or they're terrible people, but also not being like, well, maybe you should just let it go. Maybe you're not on the right path. Just listening and saying, that sounds tough. That sounds terrible. So getting to know me and really listening, two big things.
Yeah.
And no pressure.
No pressure. That's true.
No pressure.
And I think we'll end this part of the conversation there, but I think that's the thing that I've heard, not just from you guys, but from hundreds of people at your church. Pastors, sometimes the most life-giving thing we can do is take pressure off of people. There's not pressure to serve. There's not pressure to give. Let the pressure that the Bible puts on it be enough. Let the pressure that the Holy Spirit puts on it be enough, because He knows, God knows exactly how much pressure is life-giving, right? But I know for us, if we had people trying to get us to serve, people trying to get us to give, people trying to get us to go through classes, next steps, growth track, all the things, that would literally run us out of churches in seasons, because we just needed to find out if it was safe. So give a safe place for people to connect, get to know them, and just be you. Even the parts that you think people will want to be better, because people will fall in love with the real you. The right people, let's say that.
Yes.
The right people who God's calling to your church will fall in love with the real you. But guys, thank you so much for this conversation today.
Yeah. Thank you.